Welcome back, my friends. Thanks again for joining us for another episode as we continue in our study through the book of Romans. We're glad you're with us on what we call the Source of Truth podcast. And our goal here is to go verse by verse, section by section through different books of the Bible. And at this moment, we're studying through the book of Romans to give practical daily information about the Bible, but encouragement and principles as well. If you're following along with us, we are in the book of Romans, chapter number 11. As we're walking through a section, we've talked about Romans is a great book of doctrine, doctrine working around what we call the doctrine of soteriology, of salvation, and there's many other things we could name coming out of this. But really, the key verse is Romans 1:16. Paul says he's not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And so, what is the gospel? How do we receive the gospel? What does it mean in other parts of life? What is the fulfillment of it? What comes with it when we get saved? At this point, he's been walking through, talking a lot about God's chosen people, the original chosen people, Israel, the nation of Israel. In Old Testament, that was God's chosen people. And there's an awful lot, can be a lot of debate in theory and theology and church over where does Israel fit right now in the church. And there's a lot of debate on it. From my perspective, the Old Testament, what we know often called the Old Covenant, was given to Israel. There is this break in time and where God has opened, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment, God has opened the gospel, not just to the Jewish people, but to Gentiles, all non-Jewish people, and that is what we call the age of the church. That age will end. We will get into the prophetical times, and then God will bring back Israel to itself. We're going to see that in these verses. So let's go ahead and try to unpack. There's a bunch here. We'll see if we can do it in one episode. If not, we'll just kind of pick up in part 2 next time. But verse number 11, chapter 11, verse 11 of Romans says this: I say then, have they, this is Israel, have they stumbled that they should fall? So because remember in context, they've been talking about the idea that Israel had rejected the Messiah. And because of that, in AD 70, when the temple was destroyed, basically God has kind of set Israel aside for a moment. There's always a remnant, as we've talked about, but set them aside as a chosen nation. Now he works through the local church, through the church. So we see that. So have they stumbled that they should fall? Or have they gone so far that they can never come back? The answer is certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. So he asks the question, has Israel in their rejection gone so far that they cannot come back? And the answer is no. God will bring them back at some point. But what he's doing at this time is he's using jealousy. So what he's done is he's taken what once was offered to the Jewish people. God, Jehovah, this relationship that is now extended to the gospel to all who would receive it. He has said jealousy is the issue. So once it was just Israel, and he's offering it to Gentiles for the hope that would bring the Israel people jealousy, that they would realize what they're missing, and at some point desire to come back to that point. Then he continues. He said, verse 12, now if their fall is riches for the world, which is true, the world, the Gentile world, we have received the gospel as a result of the choice of Israel, of their fall, of their falling away because of their choice. If that's true, which it is, if we have gained so much richness, the riches of the gospel of Jesus Christ in the world, and so if their fall, the riches of the world, and their failure, riches for Gentiles, how much more their fullness? So he says, if we in the Gentile world have gained so much through the church, through what God has offered us. We've gained salvation, grace, the hope of heaven, all that comes with that. Having gained that, if we've gained so much blessing from that in this aspect of what we gain because of what Israel chose to do, how much more blessing is going to be given when Israel comes back? So we've gained it because of God says, okay, Israel, you don't want it right now. I'm going to offer it to the Gentiles. But when Israel comes back, it's going to be an even greater blessing to the entire world. So we see that God has still got his love, and his chosen people are still Israel, and he still wants to work through them. And he continues in verse 13. For I speak to you Gentiles, speaking to all of us who are not Jewish people, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. He goes, what I'm doing is important. I've been called by God to spread the gospel, not just to the Jewish, but my primary to the Gentile people. He says, if by any means I be provoked to jealousy, those who are my flesh, the Jewish people, his original flesh, and save some of them. So, for if they're being cast away, is the reconciling of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So he says, my initial thought is that this jealousy, I might still be able to reach Jewish people. And please understand, it's not that God has said the Jewish people can't be saved. It's just the way he worked through the Jewish people is not happening right now. The Jewish people can come to the gospel. As far as I'm concerned, it's the way the gospel works as the church is, that everybody from every nation can come to the gospel. So the Jewish people still have that option. He's just working differently with them. But think about it. He said, if being cast away reconciles the world to God, what will it be like? When they come back, it'll be like people coming back from the dead. See how much more life will come when the Jewish people do come back in the end times. Verse 16. And then he goes into some analogies. And this is something that the Lord often does through the Word of God, and Paul does. They often use analogies, pictures. And please understand, when you study, sometimes you look at these things and say, I don't get it. Where's he going with this? This doesn't make a lot of sense. Because the analogies he's using, and this is why it's important to know who the book is written to, the history behind. Remember, it's being written in Rome, so it's being written to Italian people. So he's using an analogy that would have been normal. We'll talk about grafting of branches as a practice that the Italian people would have used. So they would have fully understood this analogy. Just like in other cases, he talks about the seed, the sower sending out the seed. The farming community would have fully understood what he was saying. So to get a full understanding on a best interpretation of what's being stated, you have to remember who's he speaking to. We often say in interpretation, you go ask questions, who, what, when, where, why, and how. First question being who. Who was this originally written to? I don't believe you can have a full biblical correct interpretation of Scripture if you've not stopped to see who he's speaking to. What you do is you understand who he's speaking to, which explains why he is saying some of what he's saying. And then once you get to that, you can start digging into what is he saying, the principle from it, and then from there we find out what does he want for us today. But you have to have an understanding of what was he saying. So he starts in verse 16. For if the first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. So he uses both illustrations. The first, what did they call it? See if I can see it again. The first fruit is holy. The lump is holy. Basically, the first bread coming out of the oven. The root. Now, he's going to talk about the root, and that's where we're going to focus our attention on this root, because he's going to describe the grafting of a different kind of branch to this tree. And he says the reason it will work is because the roots are pure, the roots are strong. So he's going to say, let's read through it before we break it open. He goes, if some of the branches were broken off, he's referencing Israel being taken away, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them. He's referencing the Gentiles coming from a different tree, which again they would do, were grafted among them, and with them became a partaker of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. He goes, now, the Jewish people have been grafted away for this time. You as a Gentile people from a different tree have been grafted in. Again, a practice the Italian people would have been familiar with, but was unique in its purpose. But it was grafted in. It's a different tree. It's a wild tree that would bring some benefits to the tree, but the root of that, they were gaining the benefits of the olive tree, the fatness and the benefits of the olive tree. He says in verse 18, do not boast against the branches. Do not begin to think you're something special. But if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. So he's referencing something that is extremely important for us. God has always worked through the Jewish people. And really, if you want to say this, you got to be careful saying this because it can be seen wrongly. But the church really comes out of the Jewish people from Israel. What do you say by that? Well, it's simply from what he's saying. The reason the church exists, the reason the Gentile people, the reason we have access to the gospel is because the Jewish people chose to reject the Messiah. God was working through the Jewish people. To gain salvation was through the Jewish people, through Israel. They chose to reject, and God said, I'm going to open this opportunity using people like Paul to reach out to the Gentile people. And he says, because of this, through that, and please remember, Paul was a Jew. Through that, the gospel has now come, and the church is expanding and growing and is available as a result of that. God has always worked through the Jewish people. They're still his chosen people, and all the covenants in Old Testament pointing to the Jewish people are still going to come. Many believe in what's called the replacement theology, that God has replaced Jewish people with the church, and the Old Testament promises will be fulfilled for the church. I do not believe that is true. Israel is in a holding pattern. At one point, all those promises will come in the end times. God has got a list of things separate for the church itself, for the Gentile church. But he did say this, do not brag. Remember, you do not support the root. We're not holding up Jesus. The root supports us. Do not become arrogant at this. Do not look at this as arrogant or think we are special or better. Do not look down in Israel and say, what have you done? We gained it from them. What you need to look at is the root. Now, some would say the root is Jesus. Some would say the root as Israel. Whatever you look at is we have been grafted and we've been given the gospel as a result of this. We don't look at it and think we're better or special. And he'll go into detail. Well, we're going to look at it next time due to time, but he's going to go into detail what will happen. Because what you see is a level of the goodness of God, but you see the holiness of God, which, please understand, I don't think you can really understand the goodness of God until you understand his holiness. So we'll talk a bit about that next time. And really what you're seeing is just some history of how God works in Israel and how, and some depth into how the church was created and some analogies in that. We'll finish in this. There's still some more things that he's explaining that we'll look at again next time. So stick with us, as this will be into being part 1 of 2. And we'll finish these verses tomorrow and break down and give a little more explanation into it. The one thing we can gain from this is however God worked, he still offered us the gospel, and we have been given an amazing blessing. And may we hold on to that. May we embrace it, grow in it, and spread that and see what God is doing in our lives. And just hold on to that principle. We'll dig in tomorrow, get more from it, learn a little more about what God is doing with Israel and the church and how it works. We do appreciate the privilege you've given to us to be part of your day, to be part of your life, to be able to speak into you. We hope it's an encouragement, and hope you stick with us as we'll pick up here tomorrow and finish this thought again next time. Thanks again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next time.